if you're eating a low calorie, low fat diet and restricting carbohydrates, that's basically functional anorexia.
Welcome to the Dutch Podcast, where we dive deep into the science of hormones, wellness, and personalized healthcare. I'm Dr. Jaclyn Smeaton, Chief Medical Officer at Dutch. Join us every Tuesday as we bring you expert insights, cutting edge research, and practical tips to help you take control of your health from the inside out. Whether you're a healthcare professional or simply looking to optimize your own well being, we've got you covered. The contents of this podcast are for educational and informational purposes only. This information is not to be interpreted or mistaken for medical advice. Consult your healthcare provider for medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Dutch Podcast. Now, when we think about endocrine organs, we think about the ovaries that make estrogen and progesterone, or the adrenals that make cortisol and that make androgens. But we're going to talk today about another kind of under-leveraged endocrine organ, which is muscle. And people don't always think about muscle as one that is kind of communicating and active and making hormones and communication molecules, but it really does. And it's so critical to have healthy muscle in order to have balanced hormones. In fact, one of the things I was thinking about today, when we talk about our culture of in America, people being overweight, a lot of it is they're under-muscled. And that's the takeaway I really got out of today's episode. We are going to talk today about why building muscle has to be on women's radar, really no matter their age or their reproductive status. And we're going to learn exactly why. What is it about muscle that supports good blood sugar? What is it about muscle that supports balanced hormones? And then more importantly, what you can do as a woman to really get started with strength training, with building muscle, and then how to eat and provide the right supplementation and the right lifestyle that you can really build and make your muscle healthier. My guest today is Dr. Jaime Seeman. She's a board-certified OB-GYN, a health advocate, and a fierce proponent of women embracing strength in both their physical and mental lives. She's really made health a lifelong mission. She's a former college athlete in Miss Nebraska of 2020. She's a mother of 3 daughters and an advocate for resistance training for women of all ages. She also wrote a book called Hard to Kill, in which she outlines the 5 pillars of health that guide her philosophy. You can find her online as Dr. Fit and Fabulous, where she inspires women around the world to take control of their health, lead with confidence, and live life to the fullest. Let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Seeman. Well, Dr. Seeman, I'm really thrilled to have you on the podcast today, and I'm so excited about the topic that we're going to talk about. And it's something that I'm just really thrilled that it's become more of the health conversation for like midlife women. I just feel like it's so important. Before we dive into all of the muscle metabolic details, I think it's so interesting because you have this background in exercise science and nutrition, but you went on to become an OB-GYN, and that's a pretty unusual combination. How did those worlds come together?
Well, as a little girl, I always had interest in medicine, but my mom was a nurse and was in healthcare administration. So when I went to college, I was going to be an exercise science major because I was an athlete. I played college softball. And I showed up on the first day at college, and I'm at the registration desk, and they said, unfortunately, our exercise science program has been shut down. We've let go a bunch of faculty, and you're going to have to pick a new major.
Oh.
And I'm sitting there as like a freshman in college, just absolutely panicking. And I said, well, I don't know, what do pre-med people do? And so I picked biology for one semester. And then thankfully, the university ended up creating a new undergraduate program called Nutrition, Exercise, and Health Sciences. And they took the existing exercise science faculty with a lot of the nutrition faculty. And these are the people that are teaching the registered dietitians, that are working in our hospitals and clinics. And I thought, well, this is great because if I don't go to medical school, this is like such a fantastic backup because I had always had this interest in health and wellness, but also the sports side of it and weightlifting and exercising. So I never would have guessed that having a degree like that was so much different than a lot of my colleagues. Most of them are biology, biochemistry, physics, something in more of those basic sciences. And I think on the other side of it, becoming a clinician that works with patients every single day, that has single-handedly become one of the best tools in my toolbox. And most doctors don't have that background. So it turned out to be a complete blessing in disguise in my world, and has changed the way that I've practiced medicine since I started.
It actually seems like a much better fit for a pre-med style major because it's so human and so clinically oriented where, I did biochemistry and molecular biology. So similarly, it's like that basic science track, which of course You learn biochemistry, but you don't learn the nuances of how it applies to humans with the same specificity.
Exactly.
It seems like a really good
Exactly.
track. Now, you've shared a lot online about your own health journey as well, weight gain, thyroid dysfunction, hormone imbalance, and like how that shapes your clinical approach. Tell me a little bit about like how that's impacted the way you practice today.
Well, as a young athlete, I never knew it at the time, but I ended up being diagnosed with PCOS, and that's actually not an uncommon diagnosis amongst female athletes because they do get a slight advantage having higher
I,
androgen levels and
I've thought about
competing.
this quite a lot. Yeah.
So, fast forward, I left college, I went to medical school, my husband and I got married, and he wanted to start a family. And I had been on hormonal birth control, like many of my friends had been. And when I came off of it, I wasn't having periods. My doctor ran some labs. She's like, this is definitely PCOS. We need to put you on metformin. You're probably going to have to take Clomid to get pregnant. Now, back then, I mean, I had like very little knowledge, about how my own body worked, and I was just in my very early years of medical training. So fast forward, I ended up having three pregnancies in about 56 months. My girls are all 23 months apart.
Wow.
I did not have to use Clomid to get pregnant, but I was on metformin when I got pregnant with my first daughter. But I went on an extremely calorie restricted diet because all I knew from my medical training was like people with PCOS just have to lose 10% of their body weight and they can, generally reestablish ovulation. So I've told this story numerous times and now I just feel silly saying it because of my training now, but you only know what back then.
Mhm.
But I was essentially eating off the salad bar in the hospital and I was eating iceberg lettuce with cottage cheese and sunflower seeds. So it was
Uh,
basically like a low carb, low calorie diet, but it worked. We got pregnant with my daughter. And the other huge difference for me was in college, I was weightlifting, I was training, people were telling me what to do. And then when I transitioned to medical school, I'm suddenly sedentary. I'm sitting in the
mm,
library, I'm taking tests on Saturdays. I'm just not as physically active as I was back in college. And so after my husband and I had our daughters, fast forward, I'm now out in clinical practice and I'm seeing patients and I'm seeing all the real world things that people are struggling with. Moms who can't lose weight, they have low thyroid function, they have hormonal imbalances, maybe they have PCOS. Then of course you have the perimenopause and menopause patients. And what I realized was that traditional medicine was not really, helping these people. And looking at my own health journey, what happened was I stopped lifting weights. I was only counting calories. I wasn't paying attention to the, you know, actual composition of my diet. Was it giving me the nutrients I needed? Did I have an appropriate amount of protein and carbohydrates? I was ended up being diagnosed with pre-diabetes, which is a risk factor when somebody has had PCOS.
mhm.
And I had been on thyroid meds since my girls were born. And so, really, through my own self discovery of saying, I can't expect my patients to do things that I'm not willing to do myself. I kind of set out on this personal journey to fix my own health issues. And I got on social media to kind of share it, just telling people that doctors are real humans too. Well, I never would have guessed that it would turn into, such a big thing that it has. And I'm here on this podcast because of that. But I think there's a lot to be learned when you experience something. And I learned that, nutrition and sleep and exercise and sunlight and all the things like these are the basic foundational principles that most people do acknowledge are important, but that's really the starting point. When we think about like health and wellness and supplements and HRT and all these inputs, there is this foundational principle that we can't avoid. I mean, it's like 75% of the answer, and the
Mhm.
other part is like so much smaller. And so, through my own struggles, I have learned so much, and it's been a good tool to help my patients because they're just like me. They have kids and they have jobs, and we all have to figure out how to do it in the same 24 hours in a day.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. It's so relatable. And I absolutely, like, as a clinician, I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, I'm trained as a naturopathic doctor, you're trained as a medical doctor, but I think fundamentally, when you start to live this lifestyle, which actually I think more people who move into functional medicine have had this personal experience where a
Yeah.
lot of conventional MDs who are surgeons or hospitalists, they don't ever do that journey for wellness for themselves because they're so busy with practice. Of course, there's exceptions to that. But I couldn't agree more. I feel like the longer I've been in practice, the less tools I want to use. I just want to get people to fix the basics. And you find that I would agree about 75% of the time, that's what was needed to really restore health, whether it's metabolic or hormonal and the other things, the medications, the supplements really should just be to augment that. Like you can't fix things if you're not fixing those basics.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I want to talk with you today about one of those basics, which I would say is like movement and muscle, really making sure that you're maintaining good muscle tone and good muscle structure and kind of all the advantages of that specifically to women. Because I think a lot of women really just don't have any idea. We have such a toxic diet culture and it's reformed now. Now I would say we have this kind of toxic anti-aging culture in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But muscle is not just about performance or about how you look, right? It's this active endocrine organ. Can you lay it out for us about why muscle is so important for our health beyond just physique or like physical capability?
Yeah, the unfortunate part, and I have three daughters, so this comes from like a really, like deep place inside me. When I was a little girl, it was like Cosmopolitan magazine, these like super thin models. That's what was sold to me as a woman, was like, be thin, be feminine, that's what's beautiful. And I was an athlete at the time. I said, I went to college, I was playing college softball. And so I was living in this strange dynamic of how do I be feminine and, strong and athletic. But when I left college, this actually, if anybody can see this trophy behind me, that's
Oh,
my,
I like
that's
it.
my Lifter of the Year trophy from the University of Nebraska. But I literally walked out of that university and said, I cannot wait to lose this muscle. Like I wanted my quads to go away. I wanted nothing to do with being like a strong muscular woman. And I've told the story. Fast forward, I have these three pregnancies. I get through to, at the end, I've got pre-diabetes. And what I discovered in my own health journey was that we don't focus on muscle in medicine. All they told me was like how obese the country was. They showed me these obesity maps. We're so overweight. We're so fat. Fat is the problem. And I said, one thing that really changed when my health changed was I stopped lifting weights. I was doing cardio. I was signing up for half marathons. I was going to this place called Pure Barre. Nothing against it. Fantastic place. Met some great people. But it wasn't stimulating my muscle tissue. The big game changer for me was in 2018. I went back to the gym and I started lifting weights. And as I started tracking my body composition, that's what really moved the needle. And when I sit in clinic and I talk to women, they have this idea in their head that lifting weights makes them big and bulky. But if you really want to move the needle on body composition, you should just focus on gaining muscle because
Mm.
usually fat loss is a byproduct of putting on lean tissue. You're exactly right when you say most people think that muscle is just to move our axial skeleton. Like our bicep is just to lift something up, our quads and hamstrings are just there to help us run and walk. But muscle is an active tissue. It is the greatest disposal agent of glucose in the entire body. So for somebody like me, PCOS, prediabetes, having healthy muscle tissue is an important way to dispose of glucose. It also talks to other organs in our body. There's something called myokines. So when you lift weights and you contract that muscle, it literally secretes chemical messengers that talk to our brain, it talks to our gut, it talks to our heart, it talks to all these other areas of our body. And so it's such a, simplistic view to think that muscle is just about aesthetics and how we look and moving us around. And of course, it does provide like some body armor as well.
Mm.
But muscle as an endocrine organ is what medicine has really missed the mark. And it probably comes from a place, I mean, actually don't know the answer to this, but I think if you polled, a lot of doctors, how many of them weightlift themselves? It's probably not a huge, percentage. It's such an intimidating thing, resistance training is. When I ask patients in the clinic if they exercise, a lot of them will say yes. And then I say, oh my gosh, well, what do you like to do? And so many of them will just say, I walk. I
I
walk my
walk, I
dog.
do
I go
yoga.
on a
Yeah.
2.5 mile walk every day, which is great. All movement is great movement. We want people to move. There's data behind 10,000 steps a day, but you have to put the muscle under a particular amount of stress to get the nerve ending in the muscle, the neuromuscular junction to be activated. That's part of it too, to get the benefits of weightlifting. And, I think if medicine could really start to shift in thinking about muscle as part of body composition, I think, we're in this like world of GLP-1s, and the
Mhm.
data on them is amazing, right? When you improve glucose and insulin,
Mhm.
inflammation goes down, the heart gets benefit, the brain gets benefit, the kidneys get benefit. Oh my gosh, we're seeing less breast cancer. It's good for PCOS patients. The common denominator in all of that is improving glucose and insulin. And so, if you want to improve glucose and insulin by doing the basic foundational things, you need healthy muscle tissue. And what women really need to hear is it's not necessarily about how much, it's not about putting on 20 pounds of muscle. It's about making the muscle tissue that you have healthier. Because most people are walking around, they have some muscle. But if I were to do an MRI and do a cross sectional picture of what most people's muscle look like, yes, it'll be, weak and atrophied. But what happens as our muscle tissue becomes unhealthy is fat infiltration. And this is not like the typical obese person that we're thinking about. This might be
Mhm.
somebody with a normal BMI. I have these actually amazing slides. We should send them over so you can put them on the
Yeah, I'd
podcast.
love to see them. We'll put them in.
But even people that have a normal waist circumference, a normal BMI, they get this fatty infiltration in their muscle. And this intramuscular fat deposit starts to create a hormonal imbalance, a metabolic problem within the muscle, and the muscle cannot be the glucose disposal agent that we want it to be. And so it's really about the health of the muscle tissue, not necessarily looking like the Incredible Hulk. And that's what I really want
Mhm.
women to understand.
That's actually really reassuring because I think the fact, like a lot of women, one, don't want to be huge and bulky, and most women won't be unless they're on testosterone or something to get that way.
Right.
It's great to know it's really about optimizing what you have. If you can build, I think building muscle is really important too. In fact, I stole this from a clinician I was teaching actually, and she said to me, "Should I have to talk to you about something?" I said, "Well, what is it, Kelly?" And she said, "Well, I feel a little bit dishonest, but every time a patient comes into me, whether she's like 20 or 30 or 40 or 60, I always say to her, like, this is your most important decade to be putting on muscle."
Yes.
And she's like, I feel a little disingenuous because I say it to everybody. She's like, but it's also kind of always true. And I'm like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It is always true. And I
Right
love
now.
that. Right now, like now is your best
Yeah.
time. I mean, 20 years ago would have been better. But I think just knowing it's about using it and activating, being able to activate it is really
Well, and there's such a
reassuring.
misconception too, that you can't build muscle as you get older. Some people would look at, a 20 or 30-year-old and say, this is the important time because you got to like take advantage because you're 20 or 30. But the data suggests that even into our 60s, 70s, 80s, that we can put on lean tissue. Are there some hormonal differences, growth hormone, IGF-1, some changes that make it a little bit more, difficult or make the hill a little bit steeper? Yes. But the data shows we absolutely can put on lean tissue at any decade of our life. And so it's never too late to
Mm.
start. And there's some really cool data in older women. I think people think when I sit in the clinic and say, you need to lift weights, they are literally thinking about bench press, they're thinking about back squats, they're thinking about these big compound lifts. There is a cool study in women 65 and older. So we're talking like well past menopause. They enrolled these women into a resistance training program using resistance bands. I mean, we're talking like, order the ones on Amazon.
$12 for a set.
And
Yeah.
it was an 8-week program, and they did resistance bands, and they had improvements in strength, improvements in all of their biomarkers, improvements in gait speed. And that's another thing we should talk about. But I think the amount of work required to see benefit is actually smaller than most women think in their mind when a practitioner is telling them, you got to focus on muscle and you got to do some resistance training.
Well, I started lifting probably in my mid 30s. It was probably just about 10 years ago. I was always active, but I was like running triathlons or doing yoga 6 days a week or whatever. I didn't really find weightlifting. It's completely addicting. But I will say when I first started, I was using like cans and jugs of water in my home because I wasn't sure I wanted to invest in buying weights. And it was during COVID or just before
Mhm.
COVID. It was hard to access a gym where we lived. So, I mean, I'm doing a lot more, but you don't start with like compound lifts on a Smith machine. You start
No.
with the small weights, and the part that's so fun is seeing the way you can progress over time. It
Yeah.
really becomes addicting.
Well, and you can start with body weight. I mean, for
Body
for
weight,
some
absolutely.
people, if
There's so
you're
much.
overweight, like you got the weight already. And so, You can do push-ups, you can do body squats, you can do a split squat. I mean, there are ways you can even do it with no equipment at all,
Yeah.
which
Wall
is
sits still are like so hard to do. Just to do the wall sit where you're like backs pressed against the wall and you're trying to get your legs parallel. I mean,
yeah.
that will get anybody going and sweating.
There's also something
Definitely.
called exercise snacks. And for my busy people like myself, I love to talk to people about this. I'm like, hey, listen, one thing that can really help you during the day, not only with things like glucose and insulin, it also helps with cognition, is to get up from your desk and do, calf raises, a set of body squats, a set of push-ups, like whatever it is. There's even a very, very, very simple study that was done with sitting with our feet under the desk, just like this. And all you're doing is doing calf raises under your desk. And those
Mm.
people had better glucose control just by stimulating that calf muscle. So even just like little exercise snacks, we got to we got to understand that the fruit is pretty low hanging here, incorporating some of these things into our lifestyle.
That's so reassuring. So I want to dive a little bit more into the physiology behind this. How does muscle mass specifically affect estrogen and our reproductive hormones, estrogen metabolism? And what do you think about that of like why that's so important for women who are going through perimenopause and maybe even later than that?
So, when we think about hormones, let's talk about estrogen and testosterone. So, everyone
Right.
thinks about testosterone, of course, as a male hormone, but women actually have more testosterone in our body than estrogen. Our estrogen is actually made from testosterone through a process called aromatization. And something that can actually increase aromatization is extra body fat. It increases an enzyme called aromatase. And so, sometimes women with extra body fat actually can have large amounts of estrogen or too much. What do these hormones do to our lean tissue? Well, testosterone is anabolic. It's why it's a hormone that can be abused in the bodybuilding world, and there are women who abuse testosterone for its anabolic effects. Um, and so testosterone is very much anabolic, not only to our lean tissue, but to our bones as well. But let's talk about normal levels. Testosterone is important for women. It's important for maintenance of our lean tissue. It's important for our sexual function and libido, and for our bone health. So as women age, there's an age-related decline in testosterone production, just like in men, but it's not like estrogen and progesterone. So it doesn't really fall off the cliff, at menopause like estrogen and progesterone do. Estrogen doesn't necessarily have a direct anabolic effect, but it is very much anti-catabolic. So
Mm.
let's go back to a woman who's in her years of fertility. So we'll say she's kind of in this 25 to 45 year old age range. During a menstrual cycle, and anybody that's menstruating, we have differing levels of estrogen production. So in the first half of the cycle, which is called the follicular phase, when the pituitary gland is stimulating the ovaries, stimulating the follicles, and we're getting some estradiol secretion, this is a time where in the gym, they're going to notice that they have a rate of perceived exertion that is very low. They're going to feel like they can lift a house. They can recover. This is a great time to try to set a PR if you're going to try to set a PR. Glucose levels are much more stable. So estrogen also helps within the muscle. We talked about it being a disposal agent for glucose. Having that estrogen is part of that equation. With insulin sensitivity within the muscle tissue. So our hormones contribute to that insulin sensitivity. There's some really interesting studies on estrogen and mitochondria. So estrogen directly influences DNA gene transcription within the mitochondria. So when we have lower levels of estrogen, we have mitochondria that don't work as efficiently. So if we move the needle, now we're in the 45 to 55-year-old age range, which is our perimenopause and menopause patients. As we lose that estrogen, we start to see an increase in oxidative stress in the muscle. We see an increase in inflammation. We notice that those mitochondria are not working as well. And as that muscle tissue starts to atrophy and it's not using glucose and insulin as well, we start to see that fat deposition within the muscle. If I go back to the woman that's menstruating, at particular parts of her cycle where estrogen is lower and progesterone is higher, there's also changes within the muscle. So there is a little bit more insulin resistance and a little bit more glucose instability. And
Mm.
it also affects things outside of the muscle system. So our hunger hormones are different. This is why people
Different
experience.
meaning like let's eat a bag of chips and a bar of chocolate.
Yes, yes. And it affects things in our brain. So we're focusing
Right.
on muscle today, but the estrogen and progesterone changes also change our dopamine and serotonin levels. They change our sleep. So our hormones are very intricately tied into our circadian rhythm. our fertility rhythm. Our hormones are so important to every single tissue in our body, muscle being one of them. So if you optimize your estrogen and testosterone throughout your lifetime, um, parts of your life, your ovaries are doing amazing, doing exactly what they're supposed to do. But that's, of course, if we're taking care of our bodies and allowing our ovaries to do that. But then once we go through menopause, hormone optimization can help with retention of lean tissue. It can help with retention of bone mass. It reduces our risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes because of the way that it controls insulin and glucose. Estrogen has very much an effect on glucose and insulin sensitivity. Optimizing hormones is important for those things, especially muscle.
It's so interesting because there's this bimodal relationship between muscle tissue and hormones, because I think you see that when muscle is active and optimized and healthy, it actually helps keep hormones in balance, like you
Yeah.
talked about with changes to aromatase, and like you need that metabolic balance to have good reproductive hormone balance. But then likewise, when your reproductive hormones are thrown off, you're saying there's this impact on the muscle tissue as well. It's
Yes.
really important to kind of get everything straightened out.
Yes, I completely agree with you. The contractions of the muscles, having a normal body fat for men and for women, will optimize hormone production.
We'll be right back with more. If you're already running Dutch tests in your practice or thinking about it, there's never been a better time to become an official Dutch provider. Why? Because we go beyond lab testing. Our provider community gets exclusive access to clinical education, in-depth report interpretation, training, monthly case reviews, and one-on-one clinical support. Whether you're just getting started or looking to sharpen your functional hormone expertise, we give you the tools to grow. Join thousands of providers already making a difference. Visit DutchTest.com today. Welcome back to the Dutch Podcast.
So I want to talk a little bit about types of exercise. I know you're talking about weight training and weightlifting. And it seems as though for many women, it's like they've just never done it before. They've never been encouraged to do it before. It's really, we are a cardio culture. Even still, I think we're starting to see a shift, but women seem to be more comfortable engaging in cardio. And I think part of that is like the generation of women in perimenopause and menopause today are the ones that did aerobics classes or were pushed to do steady state aerobics, and they were comfortable with that. And I remember in my practice, I had a lot of women who were like even instructors, fitness instructors, who they'd hit menopause and they're like, I'm still teaching all these classes and working out on my own, but now I'm starting to gain weight. Like I'm doing all the same things, but it's not enough and I haven't changed my diet. And can you describe that situation? Because I think that's such a common challenge for women in midlife. And like would building muscle or shifting to weight training affect that trajectory?
Yeah, so I made a statement early in the podcast that like all movement is good movement. So
Yes.
we want women exercising, and the barrier to entry with cardiovascular exercise, a treadmill, an elliptical, those types of things, they're less intimidating to women. When you walk into a gym, the cardio section has more women in it, and the weightlifting section, and especially the free weight
Oh
section,
yeah.
has far more men. I quoted a study in my TED talk that in the free weight section of the gym, for every woman, there was 27 men. I mean, it's like, it's not even close. And the comment section on the internet gets kind of wild because there are a lot of women weightlifting. And so, that kind of stat is like, really? Like, wow. But it's true. It's just boys are taught to be strong, that's like a very masculine thing. It's not like that for girls. They don't have the same role models. And when they go on and they're swiping their Instagram, like the people they aspire to be generally aren't the like big physically strong people. But I think what most women are really trying to achieve with their body, I always say, if you only have 30 minutes in your day to incorporate some sort of exercise routine, you're going to get more bang for your buck doing resistance training, because you can do a resistance training program on an interval timer with minimal rest, and you get the same cardiovascular aerobic benefits that you would get going on the elliptical or the treadmill, and the benefits of doing the weightlifting. So for me, I'm about habit stacking. Let's put this into a 30, 45, 60-minute window that I have, and I'm going to get the benefits to my cardiovascular system and my muscles at the same time. And for any woman listening that thinks that she's like going to get super jacked because she started lifting weights in 2026, we all have a genetic potential. I have genetically larger quads than other women. I mean, God built us all in different ways. But I dare you to try, and you will never, ever, ever be like these female bodybuilders. Like, they are using peptides, they are using hormones, they're
And they're
using
eating
anabolic steroids,
thousands of calories a day to try to like build up muscle.
massive amounts of food.
Yeah.
Like, you just won't. It's I have been weightlifting for a super long time, and I'm telling you, it takes like months and years to like really achieve something that you think is going to like happen by lifting up like one weight. So
Mhm.
um yes, women have got to get into the resistance section. It can be bands, it can be dumbbells, it can be machines. We talked about it, being body weight. But women are just sold this bill of health of just like, it's got to be running, it's got to be cardio, cardio, cardio. And cardiovascular exercise is good, but it does not stimulate the muscle like resistance training. It just doesn't, and it will not give you the benefits. If you go look at marathon runners, many of them are very thin, they're very lean.
Yeah.
Um,
Marathon versus like a sprinter. Like even, well, you can build muscle, I think, more when you're in those interval spurt type of training. Like you look at the physique of a sprinter versus the physique of a marathon runner, and one's catabolic and one's anabolic. Like you can see that.
yes, and the other extremely important aspect of resistance training as we age is in our muscle tissue, we have different types of fibers. So we'll break them up essentially into fast twitch and slow twitch. There's some in between fibers, but essentially fast twitch and slow twitch. And as we age, there is a natural progression that we start to lose our fast twitch muscle fibers and they turn into slow twitch muscle fibers. And this is a problem because when you are a little grandma or grandpa and you're, tooling around your house and you don't have those fast twitch muscle fibers anymore and you have unhealthy neuromuscular junctions within your muscle, if you trip on a rug and you fall and you break a hip, you may die. You may never get out of the hospital, never get out of the rehab facility. That might be the end of your life because you tripped on a rug. And as we get older, we need to try to maintain as many of those fast twitch muscle fibers as we can. And resistance training is one way to do that. I also love sprint interval training, and it can be done in a very safe and effective way, like using a bike or a rower or something like that. But that's another important aspect of muscle aging that we're not acknowledging. But I'm gonna go back to just getting people lifting weights.
Right.
um, More women lifting weights, and so many benefits. So many benefits.
What do you think is the easiest way for women to get started? Like, would you do like free weights at home, or do you worry about form? Would you use more machines? How do you typically get women going if they
Yeah.
are
Yeah,
intimidated?
that's one of the concerns is because injury,
Yeah,
people, you get somebody that, tears a rotator cuff and now they have to have surgery and
I've
now
done
they're in
both.
rehab. Yeah, I mean, so injury is a big deal.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do is we need to start slow and ease into it. I always tell patients, if you have the means to do it, if you can pay for it, you should hire a personal trainer that's going to help you one-on-one learn how to do the movements. I think once people have been doing it for a while, they absolutely can do a program on their own. But
Mm.
I think it's important if you've never, ever, ever done it before, to have somebody with expertise helping you through kind of learning. Now, in this day and age, with these apps and with online, oh my gosh, people have access to things that we never had access to, back in the 80s and 90s. But watching a video online and actually executing something, two different things, right? You can like, everybody's done it. You watch them make the recipe online and then you make it in your kitchen. You're like, yeah, that didn't quite turn
Like
out
that
the
show
same
nailed
way.
it. It's like exercise nailed it, you know.
And that's because,
Funny.
people think weightlifting is just like lifting up the weight, but there's time under tension. There is the eccentric and concentric part of the contraction. There are a lot of other more advanced aspects of resistance training that are important. So I think if somebody's first starting, I think hiring a trainer is amazing if you can afford it. And even if it's just for like a couple sessions to say like, teach me how to do this. What should I be feeling? These days, though, you can go on Chat GPT and you can
Hmm.
literally say, make me an 8-week resistance training program. I have 20-pound dumbbells and 10-pound dumbbells, and I want to do arms 2 days a week and legs 2 days a week. It's going to spit out a program that's effective. So, I
It's
mean,
amazing.
it's crazy. And there's so many great apps out there. I personally, though, enjoy the social aspect of the gym. Not to chit chat, not to like sit around the water cooler and drink, But I work harder around other people. When I see other people, I learn from watching other people. I get pushed harder by watching other people. So I go to a place every single morning at 5:30 in the morning, and it's adults my age, and we're lifting weights and we're doing back squats and bench press and
Mm.
deadlifts and things like that. So I like that. Some people do better. They want to be alone. They don't want to be. They don't want people. They don't want to feel that people are like watching them or judging them. And so I think the right place and time and way is very different for everyone.
I think that's such a great recommendation. And here's the thing about it was it's getting a trainer to start. Once you learn some basic exercises, it's kind of all you need. One thing I think about exercise is that, especially with social media, everyone's trying to get an edge or put something new out there to go viral.
Yeah.
And some of the variations on exercises you see, you're like, yeah, they would work. They'll build muscle, but like you don't really need to do that. I
Yeah.
think that we don't need to overcomplicate it. If you learn the basic movements, you could do a similar program with with progressive overload, you might do more reps or less reps and more weight or supersets, or like you can change those things up if you have a basic repertoire of exercises without doing things that feel completely like out of the norm, you know.
Yeah. And the other aspect that a lot of people ignore is that all of our muscles have an agonist and an antagonist. And so if you're training quads, you've got to be training hamstrings and glutes. If you're training biceps, you've got to be
uh,
training,
or like
triceps
abs
and
versus
triceps.
back, that's another
If you're
big one.
training a lot of abs, you've got to be training your low back and your erector spinae and things on the other side. And so having a program that is balanced, that incorporates all of the things that both, adduct and abduct and extend and flex is important too. That's why I love those compound movements, because you can get, stimulation of a lot of those different things at the same time.
So I want to talk about another thing that comes up a ton when we're talking about exercise and movement, which is protein. There's so many questions about protein. And protein's like the new low carb, where it's like, oh, here's these. I found protein pretzels at
Oh
the
my God.
grocery store the other day. Like
Protein
protein
water. I'm like
everything.
waiting for protein toothpaste.
Yeah.
It's like,
And sometimes, like even at Starbucks, they have these like protein cold foam
yeah.
drinks. And I had a friend, we were on a little girls' weekend last weekend, and I did the Starbucks order, and she's like, oh, I want the protein cold foam. And I'm like, do you know how much protein is in that? It's probably like 2 to 3 grams of protein
Yeah.
more than, because it's so little milk to make the cold foam. If it's a
Mhm.
latte, it might make a difference, but don't pay $2.50 for that like protein cold foam. It's just such a marketing ploy right now. But obviously, protein's really important. Can you talk a little bit about that? How do women find what the right amount is for them
Yeah.
when they're resistance training? And maybe give some tips so that we're not all. I mean, I love the idea of just like, chicken is better, a chicken cutlet's better than a protein bar,
Yeah.
maybe. But what do you do for women like in practicality?
I love that I love that we have a protein obsession, but we're doing
I
a
do
few things
too.
wrong. We're doing a few things wrong. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant about protein. Protein is an essential macronutrient in our diet, and protein is essentially a protein is made of amino acids, and we have essential amino acids in our body, and we have non-essential amino acids. When you hear about how much protein you should eat in a day, we have data that the recommended daily allowance for protein is set at a threshold that will prevent disease, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the optimal amount of protein to optimize your performance on a daily
Is that
basis.
like 0.5 to 1 gram per kilogram, that kind of recommendation? Not enough
Yes.
for building. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. It's point eight grams per kilogram, which it's low. I mean, and some people aren't even eating that, which is scary.
Yes.
But
But
when you think
basically,
about
like
how
for
much,
the listeners, it's like take your body weight and cut it in half is like an approximation of what that would look like.
right,
Right.
right. I personally feel that most women, the more optimal range, kind of the more isn't better. So we definitely have some data that suggests that there's kind of this upper limit that going beyond that is not necessarily going to give you more results. But certainly trying to max out that protein threshold on a daily basis is a good idea for a variety of reasons. Number one, it provides you a lot of satiety. If you're eating a lot of protein, I'm telling you right now, most people don't have the hunger and satiety issues
Mm.
that they have when they eat a low protein diet, because a lot of our hunger and satiety is driven by protein. When you're constantly eating carb and fat sources and never getting that adequate amount of protein, your body will drive you to go find more. And then people can't figure out why they're hungry 2 hours later after they ate the granola bar. And a lot of the the real problem that women are encountering is exactly what you're talking about. The 2 to 3 grams of protein in the protein foam at Starbucks, 10-gram protein bar here, 5-gram protein yogurt here. When you eat protein, you should be eating 30 to 50 grams of protein all at once in a short amount of time. Here's the reason. Muscle protein synthesis, the stimulus to actually make lean tissue, tell the tissue that we still need it, build it stronger, is set by the amount of leucine that is consumed, a very important branch chain amino acid. And the reason that you hear this number thrown around, 30 to 50 grams of protein, is because depending on what kind of protein you're eating, whether it's beef, chicken, fish, eggs, or a plant source of protein, you generally have to eat about 30 to 50 grams of protein to get the amount of leucine required for muscle protein synthesis. What most women are doing is they're like dripping in 5 grams here, 10 grams here, like these little protein snacks. And that's not giving them the same benefit as if they sat down and ate 30 to 50 grams of protein and they got it down in like 30 minutes. That amount
I've
of
never
amino.
heard that before. That's fascinating because I think you're
Yeah.
right. Women are like trying to get it in, so they're dripping it in.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is so interesting. So it's actually the amount of leucine in a bolus that matters.
Yes. Yes. And
Interesting.
so if you the most effective time is when you eat breakfast, when you break fast, you have been in a catabolic state all night long when you've been sleeping, okay? And the body is taking amino acids and it's recycling them. People don't understand, your organs literally get rebuilt. Like you build,
Mhm.
I can't quote you the exact number of days, but like you rebuild your organs over a several month to several year period. Like you literally rebuild your liver, you're literally recycling amino acids. If you don't put new Lego pieces into the Lego set, your body can only, I mean, sometimes proteins get damaged and they have to be removed, broken down, removed from the body. We've got to put new Lego pieces, new amino acids in. And when you wake up in the morning, it doesn't have to be when you wake up, but whatever that first meal of the day is, whenever breakfast is, which literally means break fast, that first meal, you've got to hit that protein number, 30 to 50
Mhm.
grams with that meal. Not 10, not 20, and then 20 later, 30 to 50 grams. The next meal that becomes the most important is the one right before you go to bed. Now, I don't want you eating right before you go to bed, but whenever that last meal of the day is, which is, mostly dinner time, 5, 6 p.m., you want to get another 50 grams because now you're about to go into a 12, 16-hour fast, or whatever it is before you eat that next meal. The data kind of suggests that what you do between those two meals is less important. So if you can nail 50 grams at breakfast and 50 grams at dinner, there's 100 grams. Most women would be killing it if they got 100
Yeah.
grams a day. I
So
mean,
let's talk about breakfast and 50 grams of breakfast because there's like 7 grams of protein in an egg. So that's like
yeah,
what are some of the favorite breakfast recommendations that you give to help people get there? Because that I
yeah,
think for a lot of people, that's a lot of food to consume. And actually, let's also talk about the fact that most people's breakfast, it's the worst meal of the day as far as the
yeah.
typical options, the toast, the bagels, the cereal, the
Most
granola,
breakfast foods are
the
carb
high sugar
heavy.
yogurts, like all the stuff we eat is absolute trash at breakfast time.
Mhm.
So, what do you usually do at breakfast time?
So I'm a huge fan of eggs. I feel bad for people that don't love them or have like an allergy because I love eggs. So eggs are a good source. Cottage cheese, yogurts, but you can eat meat for breakfast, okay? And it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be bacon and sausage. You can have, salmon, you can have chicken. Like this concept in America that breakfast is like cereal and juice and bagels and donuts is just like it was created by the food industry. Like they told you
Right.
that that's what breakfast was. So all foods are on the table as an option for breakfast. Now, you're totally right. If you have, small eggs and they're only 5 to 7 grams for each egg, like, are you really going to eat? Now, I never eat less than 4 eggs at a time. Okay. But, somebody's probably not going to eat 8 eggs to try to get, this protein in. But you can add different foods. You can do eggs and a little yogurt, 2 pieces of sausage or whatever it is. But here's where you can also fill in the gaps. So maybe you eat 4 eggs so that you're getting protein, you're getting healthy fats, you're getting vitamins A, D, E, and K, you're getting minerals. You want real foods. You want the real food matrix. But you could add a branched chain amino acid supplement to the meal, or you could add a protein shake or supplement to the meal to fill the gaps. I don't
Mm.
love protein supplements as meal replacement. Certainly it's better than not consuming the protein. But you can fill gaps. You can fill that leucine threshold with things like protein supplements or branched chain amino acids with a meal if you just physically cannot eat that much. And that's like people using like GLP-1s. That's a trick that I tell them all the time
That's a
because
great
they
point.
have delayed gastric emptying and they cannot eat 8 eggs. Like I'm telling you, they'd be puking their guts out.
Yeah.
But what they could do is like eat 2 eggs and then take a scoop of branched chain amino acids and drink that down, after their eggs. So I think there's ways that, we can work around some of the problems that people have. But if you just, go online and look up the leucine content of foods, cottage cheese is amazing. Everyone likes to joke around like I've never eaten this much cottage cheese
I
in my
know.
life.
There's so many
100%
great jokes
protein.
about cottage cheese, but it's because it's such a great food.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
particular foods that are great. Now,
Mhm.
I eat a lot of animal proteins, and you'll hear the debate between animal and plant proteins. Animal proteins are complete, they have all the amino acids you need. With plant proteins, you have to pair them in specific ways to get all of the amino acids that are required. So, if you want to talk about efficiency, animal proteins are a more efficient way to get enough protein in a lower calorie package. So, if you compare like how much broccoli and quinoa that you would have to eat to get the same amount of protein as steak or chicken, then you're just going to be more efficient at a calorie
Mm.
standpoint eating animal proteins. The other thing is that amongst the animal proteins themselves, there are different amino acid profiles between red meat like beef and steak versus chicken, as far as like methionine content and things like that. But in general, if you can get 30 to 50 grams of protein, incorporate some animal proteins in there, do that at least twice a day, you're killing it more than most people are.
That's awesome. I love, so I'll usually do like 2 eggs plus egg whites, which just is easier for me to get more protein with less volume because you don't have the fat, the filling fat of the egg
Right.
yolk. And you can mix cottage cheese into that and scramble it, and it's like so, so good. Anyway, but the other trick that I'll throw in there is I do like a protein iced coffee a lot of times as well, where I'll make an espresso. I use this like brand called Clean Simple Eats, which is a whey protein
Yeah.
base. It's really clean ingredients and their flavors are so good. So I like the vanilla. You can even buy it at Target. It's like I'm not repping for them or anything, but they're just easy to use. And I'll do like half a scoop or a full scoop, and then use one of those little blenders, whiz it up a little bit.
Yeah.
I add soy milk, which has addition like 9 grams of protein in the soy milk, and then put it over ice, and it is so good. It tastes better than a Starbucks vanilla latte, but it's so clean, and it's another way that you're
So
adding
many
like
more
another 20
nutrients
grams of
too.
protein. It's
Yes.
really, but you can add to it like that too. And I'll do that in the afternoon a lot as well as like a little treat, but that's not
I
30
love that.
grams at a time. But there are ways to do it. And I think the other thing I love is soup in the morning. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a weirdo like that, but you can get a lot of protein in that as well and a lot of fiber because protein and fiber are like just
Yeah.
keys to the health castle. The other piece of that I want you to touch upon before we kind of shift topics, I do want to talk about the Dutch test since we're on the Dutch podcast today, but I have so many questions for you. But I think one of the things that's a challenge for women who are starting to weight train that I'm seeing in practice, and I'm sure a lot of people are as well, is women are not eating enough carbohydrates to really fuel their training. And so while we are focusing so much on protein, a lot of times we're choosing these protein replacements that are lower carb. Can you talk a little bit about what you think is the really like the minimal or the optimal amount? Or what's
Yeah.
your stance on that? Do you see that a lot as well, where women are either inadvertently or on purpose reducing carbs?
Well, it kind of depends on, your health status. Like for somebody like me, when I first started, I was, pre-diabetic, I was, slightly overweight. For me, I enjoyed the low carb approach,
Hmm.
but as I got healthier, as I got leaner, as my, metabolic health improved, my tolerance for carbs improved as well. And so I have slowly over the years, gone from eating in that 30 to 50 gram range to now I'm, more in the 50 to 100 range, depending on the day. Carbs are obviously easily abused in the American diet. They're just like easy to find. There's carbohydrates everywhere. What we're talking about is incorporating whole food carbs. So when I'm sitting with a patient talking about carb consumption, I am not talking about eating chips and cookies and crackers and biscuits. I'm talking about having a little bit of rice with your meal, having an apple before you go to the gym. Those are the type of carbohydrates that we're talking about. The question about like how many carbohydrates to eat in a day, part of it depends on how much fat you're eating in your diet. Protein, I think of it as those little Lego blocks. There's like, that's where the bar is set, and you got to try to hit that every day. When you talk about carbs and fat, these are energy calories. And so you can eat a high fat, low carb diet, you can eat a high carb, low fat diet, and most people can still achieve good metabolic health. You cannot overeat both of them. So part of the question of like how many carbs should I eat depends on how much fat's in your diet. If you're eating a low calorie, low fat diet and restricting carbohydrates, that's basically functional anorexia. So it depends how much fat you're eating. So you have to think about that. If you're eating lower fat protein sources like turkey and chicken, that's different than eating, you're having a ribeye at dinner and you're eating eggs and you're putting butter on them. So you have to think about how much fat you're eating. But when it comes to carbs and performance, there is some advantage to carbohydrates, but it's actually not a huge amount. So it's about 10 grams of carbs like before the gym, which is not, it's like a
That's
couple
great.
apple
Like
slices.
half a banana. Yeah.
Like half a banana. Like it's not that much. But it is a good idea to time your carbohydrates around the gym, a little bit of carbs before, a little bit of carbs after. And I always say you have to earn your carbs. So if it's a day where you're not super physically active, I would generally keep them a little bit lower for me. If it's a day that I'm super active, I'm doing, a lot of exercise, I'm on vacation, I'm hiking a mountain or whatever, I'm going to add a few more carbs. I'm going to have a little more fruit, might have a little, some starch or rice or something with my meal after my physical activity. So I think it's different for everybody. It kind of depends on where is your metabolic health at? How much muscle do you have? Because if you have healthy muscle tissue, you're a great glucose disposal person, and you can tolerate, more carbs in the diet. But women do kind of have this fear, around these things, and I think sometimes they're really kind of missing the mark in how they can optimize their performance.
Great, thanks for that. So I want to talk a little bit about the Dutch test as well, because I think there are some like complicating factors that come into the whether women achieve their goals or not, or why one woman and another woman could do the same food intake, the same workouts, and get different results. So I want to dive into some of those factors. Like we talk about androgens and DHEA, we talk about cortisol. Like when a woman comes in and she's frustrated because she feels like she's doing everything right, but she's not really seeing her body composition change. What do you look for hormonally, and where does the Dutch test come in?
Well, it depends first on, how old is this person? If we're talking about somebody that is premenopausal, they're having regular menstrual cycles, or they're supposed to be having regular menstrual cycles, but they're not. We have to make sure that we're using the Dutch test at an appropriate time. Obviously, the instructions on it say to do it cycle day 21, which is going to allow us to see progesterone production, as well as our androgen and estrogen production. In a postmenopausal patient, that's more steady. So the timing of it, doesn't really matter. But when we think about, somebody's trying to achieve some level of result, how do the hormones play in? Well, we already kind of talked about how estrogen is so important for lean tissue, how testosterone is so important for lean tissue. When you go through menopause, there is no way for your body to start making estrogen again. Like there's no way to undo menopause. So in a menopausal patient, it becomes about hormone optimization. Are you a candidate for hormone replacement therapy? Is that something that you want to pursue? Because you can still achieve great results not being on HRT. I don't want women to think that like they have to be on HRT. I'm a huge fan of it. I will tell you, I will be taking HRT until you put me in the casket. But for some people, they're eating right, they're sleeping right, they're moving, they're doing all the things, and they need hormone replacement therapy to really kind of get up the next, ladder rung in a sense. I think for premenopausal patients, the reason I like something like the Dutch test is because our hormones are always in flux. And so it gives us the ability to see one point in time and a second point in time, and what is our intervention in between here that's going to like move that mark, because our bodies are incredible. I mean, women's bodies can literally grow another human, but we have to take care of them. We have to give them the sunlight that they need. I think women don't realize presence and absence of sunlight in our life has a huge impact on our sex hormone
Mm.
production. Sleep. Women don't
Sleep.
realize that getting a consistent bedtime and wake up time and sleeping the same number of hours per night can help our sex hormone production. Cortisol. I love the part of the Dutch test looking at circadian rhythm and thinking about the difference between melatonin and cortisol, thinking about the difference in what our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system does to some of these things. Um, I think everyone thinks of, just sex hormones as fertility, but it's not about that. Our sex hormones help our brain function, our muscles function. And if
Mm.
we do the right things for our body, most of the time they get it right. And when they don't, that's where we might use supplements, we might use medications, we might, use hormone replacement therapy. But those basic foundational things, we're starting to see women take a little bit more ownership, especially with like the tracking devices. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there's like a new tracking device for hormones
I've
that's going to
seen
be
that.
like
I haven't looked
a
into
continuous
it, but
glucose
it's so
monitor, but for
interesting.
hormones.
Hmm.
It's so cool. It's so cool what we're going to be able to, find out about our bodies and how they respond to certain, things that we do.
You making me think about. So I saw first of all Mary Claire Haver in one of her posts online. Heard her talk about menopause, and she called it ovarian retirement, which I was like, that is the sweetest description, and I'm gonna always think of it that way. It's like you've done enough. Here you go.
Yeah.
Here's your like Rolex watch. Go ahead and like move to the country or move to the South Florida. I love that ovarian retirement. But another thing that I think about a lot with Dutch testing, and this is women in perimenopause, which a lot of the time this is the women that we're working with who are coming in wanting to
Yeah.
work on body
Yeah.
composition, is that after you've talked about this, after menopause, the only way you get estrogen is through conversion from testosterone in the adipose
Yeah.
tissue, this aromatization. So having adequate androgens and having like adequate DHEA as well, which is an adrenal
Yeah.
hormone, is so critical for women to get through perimenopause and menopause smoothly. And I
Mhm.
think about that a lot too with Dutch testing for that mid-age women, even late reproductive phase, because it's a way to almost check in to say, how can we optimize things now before your ovaries retire?
Yeah.
And make sure that you are as well prepared, particularly for women who don't want to be on HRT or they're
Yeah.
contraindicated for that. I just want to throw that in there because I think that's such an important piece there.
I've been very mind blown over the years how many women I've checked and they have a testosterone of zero. I mean, like unmeasurable on, you know,
Mhm.
um, I'm like, how are you functioning at all? You know?
Right.
Yeah. And the tough part is because things like testosterone replacement, because it's not an FDA approved therapy for women, you have a lot of clinicians and practitioners that aren't even looking at androgen levels in their patients, or acknowledging that they play a role in the patient's health.
Hmm.
But testosterone is an important hormone. DHEA is an important hormone. Certainly more isn't better. But women should be looking at their androgen levels.
The last question I want to ask, I know we're running out of time. This has been such a fabulous conversation, is that we get a lot of questions around women who want to add supplements in. And you've talked about like branched chain amino acids and you've talked about protein powders. Are there
Yeah.
others that you think from the standpoint of body composition that are actually really effective and kind of rise above to the level where you think these are pretty good recommendations for most women?
So another one that I think is important, creatine. We get creatine in our diet, but the amount of meat that you would have to eat to get the creatine that's been shown to be beneficial in studies, you're not eating that much, trust me. So I do like creatine. Everyone thinks of it as like the young male bodybuilder supplement. It's not an anabolic steroid. It is not anabolic in any way. But what creatine does is it helps essentially with ATP, with energy production within the muscle. It also does pull in water into the muscle as well, which is why it kind of can sometimes come with a bad rap because people feel like it can make them, puffy. But I think from a optimizing body composition standpoint and what can we do for the lean tissue, I love creatine. It helps
Mm.
you essentially work harder in the gym. So if you think you're going to get the benefit of creatine by not lifting weights and just taking a creatine supplement, not the same thing. But if you're in the gym and you're lifting weights, I love creatine. There's also some really interesting data on perimenopausal and menopausal women with creatine and brain health.
Oh yeah,
So
we've
we
talked about
really
that. It's
saturate the
amazing.
creatine in the muscle. The excess creatine spills over into the brain, and it actually can help with cognition too. What other things for muscle? Magnesium is important, and a lot of our diets are very deficient in magnesium. So I'm a huge fan of magnesium supplementation. Um, there's a lot of other important things, but I think, in the basic sense, hormone optimization, protein optimization, creatine, magnesium for recovery, that's like a real basic starter pack for me for muscle health.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. I have no doubt it's going to be a wildly popular episode because you've covered so many just tangible things that people can take away from how to eat, how to work out, why it's so important. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Jaclyn.
If people want to learn more about you or follow you, what are the best places for them to connect?
I'm most active on Instagram. It's at Dr. Fit and Fabulous. I have a podcast myself, a TED Talk that's out there. I wrote a book called Hard to Kill, but I love connecting with people, and I love that you guys are out there talking about women's health and talking about muscle. This is an important conversation that we need to have.
I know, like you said, it's an endocrine organ. We've got to include it in our hierarchy that we're thinking about here. So thank you
Yes,
so much.
Strong women are healthy women.
Love it. Definitely. Well, thanks, Dr. Seeman. And thank you for all of you who listened today. I'm sure you found this as fabulous of a conversation as I did. If you want to hear more conversations like this, I invite you to click subscribe. You can listen and stream us every Tuesday from anywhere that you are listening to this podcast today. And also you can follow us at Dutch Test on all the socials. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us on the Dutch Podcast. Join us every Tuesday for new conversations with leading functional health experts. If you like what you've heard, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.